Sales Babble is sponsored by the Science of Scaling podcast, helping businesses scale revenue. Sales Babble is sponsored by Pearl Diver, turning website visits into leads. This is the Sales Babble podcast, episode 496. You know, we only learn from failure. This week, I've been listening to the Science of Scaling podcast, hosted by Mark Roberge. Mark is the best-selling author of the Sales Acceleration Formula and a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School. Well, each week, he interviews some of the most successful sales leaders in tech. People like Mike Weir and Kyle Parrish, VP of Sales at Figma. As you folks know, my entire career has been in the tech and startup space, and as VP of Sales, I know the importance of having a close relationship with marketing, development, and support. That's why the message Kyle Parrish shared on the Science of Scaling podcast really resounds with me. Kyle's insights on focusing on the overall customer experience is spot on. This podcast provides actionable advice any business looking to scale for growth will value. Check it out. Search for the Science of Scaling in your favorite podcast app. That's the Science of Scaling podcast. And you can also find links in the show notes. These days, everyone shops online before reaching out to a company's sales team. I know I do. Oftentimes, I may be visiting their website and I see what I want, but I don't sign up. Instead, I say to myself, I'll come back to it later today. But I don't. And I'm not the only one like this. In fact, that's what your prospective customers are doing every day at your website. They're hot prospects, but you don't know who they are. This is where our sponsor Pearl Diver comes in. Pearl Diver makes visible these invisible visitors. Using big data technology, Pearl Diver gives you the name, email, phone number, and even the physical address of these hot prospects. With this demographic data, you can target your ideal clients with an email marketing campaign or go old school with a cold outreach campaign. In either case, you're talking to warm leads who took action to visit your website. You can't get a hotter lead than this. Go to pearldiver.io to view the software, download sample data, and book a demo. Again, that's pearldiver.io. See who's behind the clicks.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers, and this is the podcast that babbles against fast talking and aggressive selling. Instead, it embraces the effortless action and Taoist style of non-pushy sales. I believe that the best kind of selling is when the buyers sell themselves, and when the deal's done, the buyers say, hey, I did it. Now, I'm a goof, and I screw up a lot. I'm known to talk to myself and say things like, what were you thinking? Or, you're an idiot, Pat. And this behavior really bugs my wife. She'll say, why are you so hard on yourself? To which I reply, I'm not hard enough. But she may have a point. You can read good advice, or in the case of a podcast, listen to good advice, but it's not going to be embraced nearly as much as when you personally screw up and learn a lesson from it. According to the author George Bernard Shaw, quote, a life spent making mistakes is not only more honorable, but more useful than a life spent doing nothing. Why we only learn from failure. That's the topic for today. But before we get started, make sure and subscribe to the podcast on whatever app that you're listening to, and also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and myself on LinkedIn. You can find links in the show notes. And so, with no further ado, let's get to it. And now today's chapter. We only learn from failure. A lost sale is a failure and an opportunity to learn. If you blame someone else or the circumstance, there is no end to the blame. Like the seasons, deals are won and deals are lost. Make failure the opportunity to start again, yet this time with wisdom. The master seller meets their own obligations, corrects their own mistakes, doing what they need to do, demanding nothing of others. And now today's story. Just when Chris thought the deal was a given, the client called and backed out of the final meeting. Chris was devastated and embarrassed. "What happened?" asked Pat. "I thought this was a sure deal. That's what you told me." "I know," responded Chris. "That's what I thought, but then I screwed it up." "How?" queried Pat. Chris paused and then said, "After the first presentation, they admitted they liked our basic service. Then I got excited about the newly announced services and thought I could make a bigger deal. But when I presented the new services, to my surprise, it scared them. After thinking about it, they decided to go with a competitor who has a simpler offer. I totally misjudged the situation." With an empathetic smile, Pat said, "You really screwed that up." "I know," said Chris. "I know." Pat laughed too and said, "Failure is a tough thing, but it's the only place we truly learn important lessons. Years from now, you'll forget all the deals that you closed this year, but this deal, you'll never forget. The lessons from this deal will reap rewards if you honor them." We all make mistakes. That's a given. What's not a given is what we do with that mistake. Do we learn from it, or instead repeat the error in an endless cycle? Too often, sellers fail to take responsibility for their actions. It's easy to blame the client, the market, the product, or the boss. Yet you have no control over any of them. All you can control is your own behavior and your own actions. Lao Tzu said, quote, "Those without virtue require others to fulfill their obligations." Wake up! The universe doesn't pick favorites. Expect that failure comes with success. Err on the side of kindness, and it will all work out. Now, if you'd like to read a copy of this week's chapter of the Tao of Sales Babble, you can find it in the show notes at www.salesbabble.com. You can also find links to our sponsors, Pearl Diver, turning website visits into leads, and our sponsor, the Science of Scaling podcast, helping businesses scale revenue. Next, if you could do me a favor and share this episode with a friend who's also interested in growing their selling skills, please do. On whatever app you're using, subscribe to Sales Babble and share the episode with your friend, because word of mouth is the premier way of growing listeners. Now, if you have any questions about sales or podcasting, don't hesitate to reach out. Find me on LinkedIn or click the Babble Me link on the website. That'll send a message directly to me. Now, before I end, I'd like to take a pause and thank you. Sales babblers have been reaching out to me for advice, and it's been so rewarding to help them grow their selling skills. I'm so grateful for the support that you folks give me, and to know for certain that this podcast is making a positive impact on businesses all over the world. I'm not kidding you, all over the world. And more importantly, people's lives. I'm humbled. Thank you for listening, and thank you for sharing what we do with others. So until next Tuesday, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.
This is a production of Habanero Media.